Today, I'll be talking about the most haunted places in the United States. After consulting with many paranormal investigators and enthusiasts on social media, I realised that this could quite easily be the top 100 places in the United States, so there will be plenty more of these episodes to come. The places listed here are in no particular order, so without further ado, grab a snack, dim the lights, and prepare for a feast of grim and grisly content. I'm your host, Severed Soul. The Sallie House has not just been called the most haunted house in Kansas. Some refer to it as the most haunted house in the United States. It all starts with the rumours that tell of a little girl named Sallie and how she met her tragic demise at the hands of a surgeon's botched surgery right inside the home. Built in the mid-1800s in Atchison, Kansas, the home is located at 508 North 2nd Street and has seen its fair share of history throughout the years. Passing hands multiple times, the home is rumoured to have once housed a little girl named Sallie, who actually died in the home during a wildly unsuccessful makeshift appendicitis surgery, shockingly performed without anaesthesia. But it wasn't until the mid-1990s that Sallie's tragic story gained local and national attention. Then owners Deborah and Tony Pickman began to notice strange occurrences in the home, including attacks on Tony, unexplained voices, and even finger marks on candles that lit themselves. So, who is haunting the Sallie House? Could it just be the spirit of Sallie herself? Some believe that there's more to the story, including reports of a middle-aged woman who is said to be behind the frightening attacks. Built in the 1800s, the home has 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, a modest home filled with ghosts. Initially, the home was built for Michael Finney and his family, who lived in the home until 1947. 4 members of the Finney family died of natural causes in the home throughout the years, and the home housed multiple families during its time. None, however, would be as memorable as the Pickmans. This young couple, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, bought the home in the 1990s. However, it didn't take long before they started to experience strange, spooky, and sometimes even violent occurrences in the home. These days, the home sits as a spectacle, a macabre attraction for ghost investigators hoping to solve the mysteries of the home. The home has said to be the location of almost every type of ghostly activity: apparitions, disembodied voices, objects moving on their own, shadow people, physical attacks, you name it. This could be why the home has gained much media coverage over the last 20 years. The home has even been featured on popular television shows such as A Haunting, Unexplained Mysteries, Ghost Adventures, and Sightings. The activity has been so severe at times that some believe the hauntings in the Sallie House could be demonic in nature. It's a popular belief that the house isn't haunted by the spirit of Sallie at all, but instead, the house is infested with a demonic energy that tries to lure people in by pretending to be the spirit of an innocent young girl. Others believe that the Sallie House is home to a portal of sorts that allows entities from the spirit world to enter our physical realm. Regardless of what lies behind the walls of the home, there's one thing everyone agrees on: the Sallie House is extremely haunted. People have stated that they have seen the apparition of a young girl for themselves, who many believe is Sallie, as well as the apparition of an older woman standing in the windows. Candles are known to light and burn on their own. Objects have been seen to levitate and move through the air on their own, and others have reported disembodied voices of men, women, and children. Scratching on the walls at night is a regular occurrence, alongside the sounds of furniture being moved around. There have even been reports of more physical attacks and possessions. Though the home is referred to as the Sallie House, there's no definitive proof that a girl named Sallie ever actually lived there. However, there are reports of a man named Dr. Charles Finney owning the home and operating his office out of the first floor of the residence. The legend of Sallie arose when Dr. Finney attempted to perform emergency surgery on Sallie, which resulted in her tragic death. Two versions of the Sallie story exist, one being that a woman rushed to her ailing 6-year-old after the girl was complaining of severe abdominal pain. When Dr. Finney realised that the girl's appendix was on the verge of rupture, he opted to perform her surgery at his residence, without any anaesthetics. She later died on the operating table. In the other version, Sallie was born as a result of an affair that Dr. Finney was having. When the little girl became ill, her mother brought her to Dr. Finney, since he would not allow her to go to the hospital for fear that his extramarital affairs would be exposed. Instead, he performed her emergency surgery himself. While the Sallie story can't be confirmed, there's no doubt that the home has seen its fair share of dark events. In the early 2000s, a drawing of a pentagram was discovered on the basement floor of the home. Satanic ritualistic remnants have been discovered, as well as a luminol test that was performed, which highlighted signs of blood splatter in the closet of the master bedroom. Luminol is a substance used by forensics operations that highlights the proteins found in blood underneath the black light. After Tony and Debbie Pickman moved in, a month passed with no reports of activity. However, once they began to settle into their new home, lights started to dim on their own, and family pets started to act strangely. After the birth of their son, the activity picked up even more, and strange outbreaks of mold started to grow on household items. At one point, the couple even returned home from a day out to find all the nursery's stuffed animals in a circle on the floor. That night, Tony began to feel intense burning on his back, and it was later discovered that he had 3 significant scratches running down his spine. After learning the home's history and about the story of Sallie, the Pickmans attempted to embrace Sallie as a sort of phantom daughter. Despite their attempts to form a truce with the entity, the attacks on Tony continued. During their child's birthday party, a doll was witnessed igniting into flames for no apparent reason. After 2 years of being assaulted mentally and physically in the home, the Pickmans finally moved out. Debbie Pickman wholeheartedly believes that Sallie was not the spirit of a little girl, but a malevolent entity posing as a child in order to gain the trust of the family. For what reason, we'll never know. These days, according to the official Sallie House website, Les Smith Jr. has been the actual owner of the house for over 20 years. Those who dare to enter the home can take a tour, or even stay the night in the home. However, you do so at your own risk. One Reddit user stated, "Whatever dwells within that house is probably the strongest paranormal energy I've ever witnessed. You have been warned." If you're enjoying this episode so far, then please do me a huge favour by clicking on the like button and subscribing to the channel. This would be massively appreciated. Now, let's get back to the episode. During the 1800s and early 1900s, America was ravaged by a deadly disease known by many as the White Death, tuberculosis. This terrifying and very contagious plague, for which no cure existed, claimed entire families and sometimes entire towns. In 1900, Louisville, Kentucky, had the highest tuberculosis death rate in all of America. Built on low swampland, the area was the perfect breeding ground for the disease, and in 1910, a hospital was constructed on a windswept hill in southern Jefferson County that had been designed to combat the horrific disease. The disease continued to run rampant through the region, and eventually, with donations of money and land, a new hospital was started in 1924. The new structure, known as Waverly Hills, opened 2 years later in 1926. It was considered the most advanced tuberculosis sanatorium in the country, but even then, most of the patients succumbed to the disease. There was no medicine available at that time to treat the disease, and so many patients were offered rest, fresh air, and lots of nutritious food. Sadly, the main use for the hospital was to isolate those who had come down with the disease and to keep them away from those who had not. Families were tragically divided, with parents and even children forced into the sanatorium with little contact with their loved ones. Treatment for tuberculosis was sometimes as bad as the disease itself. Some of the experiments that were conducted in search of a cure seem barbaric by today's standards, but others are now common practice. Patients' lungs were exposed to ultraviolet light to try and stop the spread of bacteria. This was done in sunrooms using artificial light in place of sunlight, or on the roof or open porches of the hospital. Since fresh air was thought to also be a possible cure, patients were often placed in front of huge windows or on the open porches, no matter what the season. Old photographs show patients lounging in chairs, taking in the fresh air, while literally covered with snow. Other treatments were less pleasant and much bloodier. Balloons would be surgically implanted into the lungs and then filled with air to expand them. Needless to say, this often had disastrous results, as did an operation where muscles and ribs were removed from a patient's chest to allow the lungs to expand further and let in more oxygen. This blood-soaked procedure was seen as a last resort, and many patients did not survive it. All the patients who survived both the disease and the treatments left Waverly Hills through the front door. Many others left through what came to be known as the body chute. This enclosed tunnel for the dead led from the hospital to the railroad tracks at the bottom of the hill. Using a motorised rail and cable system, the bodies were lowered in secret to the waiting trains. This was done so that patients would not see how many were leaving the hospital as corpses. Their mental health, the doctors believed, was just as important as their physical health. There are many inaccurate reports as to how many people died during Waverly Hills' decades of operation. Some claim that tens of thousands died within the walls of the hospital, but this number is greatly exaggerated. According to Dr. J. Frank Stewart, a former assistant medical director at the hospital, the highest number of deaths to occur at Waverly Hills in a single year was 152. By 1955, those numbers had dropped to as low as 42 deaths, and it's been estimated, based on death certificates that were filed, that approximately 6,000 people died there, dating all the way back to the original hospital records from 1911. While far short of the numbers being tossed about in the legends, it's still a tremendous number of deaths to have occurred in a single structure. By the late 1930s, tuberculosis had begun to decline around the world, and by 1943, new medicines had largely eradicated the disease in the United States. A small jump in new cases did occur after World War II, and many soldiers returning from the war were housed at Waverly Hills. Dr. Stewart noted in his autobiography that many of the soldiers had cases that were so advanced that they did not live for more than a week after arriving at the hospital. In 1961, Waverly Hills was closed down, but was reopened a year later as Woodhaven Geriatric Sanatorium. There have been many rumours and stories told about patient mistreatment and unusual experiments during the years that the building was being used as an old age home. Some of them have been proven to be false, but others have unfortunately turned out to be true. Electroshock therapy, which was considered to be highly effective in those days, was widely used for a variety of ailments. Budget cuts in the 1960s and 1970s led to both horrible conditions and patient mistreatments, and in 1982, the state closed the facility for good. Is there any wonder, after all of the death, pain and agony within these walls, that Waverly Hills is considered to be one of the most haunted places in the entire country? The buildings and land were auctioned off and changed hands many times over the course of the next 2 decades. In 1983, a developer purchased the property with plans to turn it into a minimum security prison for the state of Kentucky. Plans were dropped after neighbours protested, and a new idea to turn the former hospital into apartments was devised. A lack of financing caused this plan to be abandoned. In March 1996, Waverly Hills and the surrounding land was bought by Robert Albahaski, who ran Christ the Redeemer Foundation, Inc. He had plans to construct the world's tallest statue of Jesus on the Waverly site, along with an art and worship centre. The statue, which was inspired by the famed Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro, was to be situated on the roof of the hospital at a cost of around $4 million. The next phase of his plan was to convert the sanatorium into a chapel, theatre and gift shop for another $8 million. Not surprisingly, donations to the project fell far short of what was expected. During the first year, only $3,000 was raised towards the effort, and the project was cancelled in December 1997. Albahaski abandoned the Waverly Hills property, and then, in order to recoup some of the costs, tried to have the property condemned so that the buildings could be torn down and redeveloped. This plan was blocked by the county, and according to rumours, demolition work was then done around the southern edge of the building in order to undermine the structural foundations and collect insurance money. This scheme also failed, and in 2001, Waverly Hills was sold to Charlie and Tina Mattingly, the current owners of the property. By 2001, the once stately building had been nearly destroyed by time, the elements, and the vandals who came here looking for a thrill. Waverly Hills had become a local haunted house, and it became a magnet for the homeless looking for shelter, and teenagers who broke in looking for ghosts. The hospital soon gained a reputation for being haunted, and stories began to circulate of resident ghosts, like the little girl who was seen running up and down the third-floor solarium, the little boy who was spotted with a leather ball, the hearse that appeared in the back of the building dropping off coffins, the woman with the bleeding wrists who cried for help, and others. Visitors told of slamming doors, lights in the windows as if power was still running through the building, strange sounds, and eerie footsteps in empty rooms. Other legends told of a man in a white coat who was seen walking in the kitchen, and the smell of cooking food that sometimes wafted through the room. The kitchen was a disaster, a ruin of broken windows, fallen plaster, broken tables and chairs, and puddles of water and debris that resulted from a leaking roof. The cafeteria had not fared much better. Even so, a number of people had reported footsteps in the room, a door swinging shut under its own power, and the smell of fresh baked bread in the air. Perhaps the greatest and most controversial legend of Waverly Hills was connected to the 5th floor of the building. This floor of the old hospital consisted of 2 nurses' stations, a pantry, a linen room, a medicine room, and 2 medium-sized rooms on both sides of the 2 nurses' stations. One of these, room 502, is the subject of many rumours and legends, and just about every curiosity seeker that had broken into Waverly Hills over the years wanted to see it. This is where, according to the stories, people have seen shapes moving in the windows, have heard disembodied voices, and, if the legends are to be believed, have even jumped to their deaths. There are a lot of legends about what went on in this part of the hospital, but perhaps the biggest misconception was that this floor was used to house mentally ill tuberculosis patients. This wasn't the case. The patients here were not insane, nor were they confined to their rooms. They were free to move about, just like patients on all of the other floors of the hospital. This floor, thanks to its design, allowed patients to still benefit from the fresh air and sunshine that was believed to be the cure, or at least to extend the life of those with the disease. It was centred in the middle of the hospital, and the 2 wards extending out from the nurses' stations were glassed in on all sides and opened out onto a patio-type roof. According to the stories, a nurse was found dead in room 502 in 1928. She had committed suicide by hanging herself from the light fixture. She was 29 years old at the time of her death, unmarried, and pregnant. Her depression over the situation led her to take her own life. It's unknown how long she may have been hanging in this room before her body was discovered. And this would not be the only tragedy to occur with a connection to the infamous Room 502. In 1932, another nurse who worked in the same room jumped from the roof patio and plunged several stories to her death. Nobody seems to know why she would have done this, but many have speculated that she may have actually been pushed over the edge. There are no records to indicate this, but rumours continue to persist. Those are the stories anyway. As with so many legends, no records exist to say that any of this actually happened. There are also conflicting accounts as to how the woman managed to hang herself. Some say that she did it from the light fixture, others from a pipe over the door, and some say from the rafters. There are no rafters. The pipe over the door was part of a sprinkler system installed in 1972, and the light fixture is hung on a light decorative chain that would not hold the weight of a person. There is no actual documentation of death either, although some claim the stories were verified by a former staff member, John Thornbury, who died in 2006. According to Obituary, he was born in 1922, which would have made him 6 and 10 years old at the time of the alleged deaths that were connected to Room 502. This makes his verification more than a little problematic. So, what happened in Room 502 that could cause so many people to claim paranormal experiences there? Overactive imaginations, or is it something real? It's hard to say, but it seems likely that something occurred in that room to cause the legend to take root in the first place. What that might have been, no one knows. The story of Room 502 may have been loosely based on some forgotten facts, but the truth remains buried under all of the speculation and rumour. In spite of this, strange things continued to be reported. Over the course of the next year, volunteers working towards the restoration of the building experienced ghostly sounds, heard slamming doors, saw lights appear in the building where there should have been none, had objects thrown at them, were struck by unseen hands, saw apparitions in doorways and corridors, and more. What do you think? Is Waverly Hills Sanatorium really haunted by previous patients? Or are they simply rumours, fabricated from the building's ominous history? Let us know what you think in the comments section. What was once the most infamous penitentiary in the United States has left behind a chilling and haunting past. This penitentiary is located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and opened in the 1800s, eventually gaining its historical landmark status. A big part of its creation was due to the Philadelphia Society for Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prisons and the famous social thinker Michel Foucault. During its almost 150 years in operation, it housed approximately 75,000 inmates and witnessed many horrific deaths. After its opening, people travelled from far and wide to observe this new penitentiary. What made Eastern State so significant was its experimentation with new techniques of reformation. Understandably, this created much controversy and would leave an everlasting legacy. To this day, many people still visit the site to get a glimpse of tragedy and be spooked by the ghosts that allegedly reside there. There are many different factors that contribute to the Eastern State Penitentiary's historical and memorable significance. Although the Eastern State Penitentiary was closed decades ago due to its unsuccessful process of reformation, in terms of control and misery reduction, it leaves behind a legacy that will last for generations. It was eventually sanctioned as a historical landmark in 1965, primarily for its architecture, a design which starkly contrasts its reputation for being a place where unethical practices occurred. The Eastern State Penitentiary was built on the hopes of creating better and more sustainable prison practices when compared to previous prisons, such as the first ever jail in the United States, the Walnut Street Jail, known for its inhumane treatment of inmates. The Philadelphia Society for Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prisons concluded that these conditions could not continue, and from this, the idea for the Eastern State Penitentiary was born. This penitentiary was one of the many discussed by the famous social thinker Michel Foucault. The penitentiary was also created because those who believed in prison reform wanted to gain more control over inmates. They created this climate of control by having each inmate put into solitary confinement cells. They hoped these tactics would aid in proper reform and help inmates think about what they had done, feel remorse, and rehabilitate back into society, which later became known as the Pennsylvania system. The Eastern State Penitentiary was also extremely technologically advanced for its time, including 7 different wings of individual cell blocks that had features such as heating and indoor plumbing. Though the motivations behind the Eastern State Penitentiary were good, the horrific incidents that took place within its walls did not live up to those intentions. One of the main goals of the penitentiary was to place inmates in solitary confinement, which they hoped would create a place of spiritual awakening and remorse to lead to rehabilitation. Although this was good in theory, solitary confinement is now used as a form of punishment and has often made people become mentally ill or unstable. Upon its opening, the penitentiary became a popular spot for people to visit from across the world, hoping to see what this new type of prison system was like. Alexis de Tocqueville, famous for studying and writing about prison systems, and Gustave de Beaumont, a French politician, travelled to visit the penitentiary in 1831. After visiting, they determined that the approach taken was genius, and that solitary confinement was sure to work how they hoped it would. On the other hand, the famous author Charles Dickens did not agree with this stance, as he felt that solitary confinement would not aid inmates in rehabilitation, and instead would make the inmates more unstable than they were when they were admitted. Years later, in the mid-50s, a deputy commissioner in New York City's Department of Correction wrote an essay describing the prison system, which included that of Eastern State Penitentiary, stating that the prison systems of the United States could not make up its mind because it was partially supported rehabilitation and partially supported punishment, and this would not make for a successful prison. Again, even though part of the reason behind creating Eastern State Penitentiary was to treat inmates better than those of the Walnut Street Jail, there was still no shortage of horrific events that occurred, contributing to its shutdown in 1971. The inmates that the penitentiary housed were various types of criminals, including the famous mobster Al Capone. Some of the inmates' harsh punishments included a bath where they were submerged, then hung outside in freezing temperatures, causing ice to form on their skin. Chairs that tied inmates in so tightly they would lose circulation and have to have their limbs amputated. And a place called the Hole, where there was no light, human contact, food, and little air. In 1833, public controversy erupted because of what happened to a prisoner named Matthias Macumzi. Macumzi died from a torture device called the iron gag, which was invented to prevent the prisoner from speaking. This gag was fitted over Macumzi's tongue and attached to his arms, pinning them behind his back, causing every movement to dig the gag further into his tongue, which ultimately led to his death. From this death alone, the Eastern State Penitentiary took an enormous blow in public favour and credibility. Although this incident is far from the only death, it's one of the most notable, and is what caused many to have concerns about the penitentiary's ethical standing. Eastern State Penitentiary was far from the perfect prison system, but that does not mean that all is lost in terms of what we can learn from it. Although Eastern State Penitentiary closed in 1971, it leaves behind a legacy full of meaning and potential, including how prisons can be more successfully run. A few years earlier, riots broke out due to the terrible treatment of inmates, which was the catalyst for the penitentiary eventually closing. Upon its closure, remaining inmates were moved to the State Correction Institution at Greaterford. The penitentiary is currently being preserved by the Masonry Academy and headed by Tanira Brown. Brown is working hard to preserve the architecture, while employing previous Philadelphia inmates, giving a steady job to those who have struggled to find employment after release. Today, Eastern State Penitentiary is a popular tourist destination for people to look upon the past and experience the hauntings of former prisoners. Certain cell blocks are known for reported ghost sightings, and others for cackling laughs and echoes, with the penitentiary even being featured on an episode of Ghost Adventures. As already stated, one of the most infamous inmates to step foot in Eastern State Penitentiary was none other than Al Capone. Sentenced for tax evasion, Capone arrived in 1929 and was given special treatment, including a private cell decorated with fine furnishings, a rug, and even a radio. Yet, despite his comforts, Capone is said to have experienced intense paranoia during his stay. Visitors today report eerie sounds and feelings of unease when entering his cell, suggesting that Capone's spirit may still be trapped within these walls, haunted by his violent past. Cell Block 12, often referred to as the Cell of the Damned, is an area which housed some of the most dangerous inmates, and its oppressive atmosphere has led many to believe it's one of the most haunted sections of the penitentiary. Visitors have reported feelings of being watched, cold spots, and even disembodied voices. Some have claimed to see shadowy figures moving between the cells, a chilling reminder of the suffering endured here. Cell Block 6 was one of the cell blocks known for its isolation cells used to punish the inmates. The eerie silence and oppressive energy in this block creates an atmosphere of dread. Many visitors have reported experiencing sudden drops in temperature and feelings of despair. Paranormal investigators often cite this area as a hotspot for ghostly activity, with reports of aggressive encounters and the faint sounds of inmates' cries echoing through the halls. Cell Block 4 is an area of Eastern State often referred to as the darkest corner of the penitentiary. This block housed some of the most violent offenders, and the energy here is palpable. Many have reported feeling a heavy presence and hearing strange noises, including rattling chains and whispered conversations. The spirits of those who met violent ends may still linger, searching for justice or peace. Death Row was the final resting place for many inmates. This area is steeped in sorrow and despair, and it's said that the spirits of those who faced execution roam these halls. Visitors have reported feeling a sense of foreboding and hearing faint whispers of last words. The energy here is unsettling, leaving many with an overwhelming sense of sadness and dread. Some have even reported seeing apparitions of inmates pacing the halls, reliving their final moments. Another infamous inmate was Willie Sutton, known as the Gentleman Bandit. A notorious bank robber, Sutton spent time in Eastern State and became a legend for his daring escapes. Many believe his mischievous spirit still haunts the prison, playing tricks on both guards and visitors alike. Reports of sudden movements, laughter, and even the sounds of footsteps echoing through the halls have led many to believe that Sutton's spirit is still enjoying his freedom, even in death. Over the years, Eastern State Penitentiary has become a hotspot for paranormal investigations. Ghost hunters and enthusiasts flock here, eager to capture evidence of the supernatural. Using EMF detectors, spirit boxes, and thermal cameras, many have reported capturing strange voices, unexplained movements, and even full-bodied apparitions. The stories and experiences shared by these investigators only add to the mystique of this haunted location. Today, Eastern State Penitentiary stands as a monument to its dark past, inviting both history buffs and ghost hunters alike. The stories of Al Capone, Willie Sutton, and the countless souls who suffered here keep the spirits alive. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, the haunting legacy of this penitentiary is undeniable. It serves as a chilling reminder of the human experience within its stone walls. It's safe to say that the Eastern State Penitentiary is rich in history and is far from being forgotten. If you ever find yourself in Philadelphia, be sure to visit this haunting landmark, where history and the supernatural intertwine in a chilling embrace. That's all we have time for today. But stay tuned for more episodes of America's Most Haunted Places. If you haven't done so already, then please like the video and subscribe to the channel for a feast of grim and grisly content. As always, thanks for watching. I'm your host, Severed Soul.